This is Your Anxiety Toolkit, episode number 97. Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberly Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Well, welcome back. I am so thrilled to have you with me today on this beautiful, beautiful day. And it is a beautiful day to do hard things. I have to keep telling myself that, it's particularly as we go through tougher times, and that's a part of our life. So if you're finding that you're having more tougher days and feeling like you're maybe losing a little bit of hope, remind yourself that through staying in the discomfort and by leaning in and holding a safe place for it, you'll actually come out stronger. Really, you will. You'll learn that you are stronger than you thought, and you'll trust yourself a little bit more in that process because you held your heart dearly on the way. I have an incredible interview for you today. You guys, this one was so touching to me. We both shed many tears, and I really felt that this was such an honest account of what recovery looks like and some of the emotions that you will feel or may feel as you go into recovery. We talked about anger and loss and grief and hopelessness and all the feelings that maybe you're feeling. And so if you are feeling that, first of all, I want to make sure that you know that you're not alone and that this podcast might be just what you need to hear today. I am so excited to announce that we have Christopher Tronsden on the podcast. Now, Christopher was someone I have met multiple times when I speak at the OCD Southern California conference, and Christopher Tronsden is, I believe, the co-chair, and he does an incredible job with the SoCal IOCDF affiliate group of running an amazing, amazing conference down in Irvine, California. And he's just an incredible human being, and he has such a story to share with you guys. He gives you a ton of hope, and I'm sure by the time you finish this, you will feel quite hopeful because he gives you some amazing, amazing pieces of hope. So before we get into that interview, I'm going to first do the I Did a Hard Thing segment. And today we have a submission by Ashley. And Ashley said this: I have been anxiously awaiting a medical test result all week. Last night, I decided that the Googling had to stop. I chose to Google instead of walking my dog, and that's when I admitted to myself that it was affecting my life, even in the small ways. I replaced my Safari app with my journaling app in case I had any urges today, as a visual reminder to sit with the waiting. I went all day without Googling, and ironically, my doctor finally called with the results the day I chose to stop self-assuring through Google. So thank you, Ashley. That is incredible. I think particularly those who have reassurance-seeking compulsions, Google can really get in the way. It might feel like it's going to get you some relief, but it doesn't, because we know that fear just has another way of asking another question, and we have to go back to Google. So I think you did an amazing job there of what we call response prevention. And I really loved your willingness. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Ashley did a hard thing, and I'd love to know more about the hard things you're doing. So please do go over to the Facebook group and you could submit your story. Okay? All right. So let's go over Christopher Tronsden incredible human. He gives you all of his details at the end of the episode. You will love it. All right. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you next week. Well, I am beyond excited to have Chris Tronsden here with me today, one of my new favorite people in the whole wide world.
Well, hi, you're one of my favorite people in the world, so that works.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. That makes this gel very, very well.
Yeah.
I really got to know Chris more at the OCD Game Changers event, where I listened to your most incredible presentation on the emotions that you experienced as you went through your own recovery with mental illness and mental health. So I would love to speak with you here about some of those steps. Would you first give us a little bit of what your story is like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like many people watching this podcast, I'm an individual with OCD, and it wasn't as discussed. I think right now OCD is talked about a lot more, but when I was going through it, it wasn't as discussed. And so, little things that I did as a kid until it really kind of piled and compounded my high school, sort of the end of my high school, junior, senior years is when it really hit me hard. My family and myself really didn't know what I was going through. And so I think what was so difficult is I suffered in a lot of silence and a lot of confusion because it wasn't clear to me what OCD was. And a lot of the things I was struggling with wasn't kind of that stereotypical OCD experience. And so for me, it just kept on getting stronger and stronger the more I gave into it. And I had moved out from my parents' home mainly for OCD reasons. I had a lot of intrusive thoughts about family members on both the harm and the sexual side of it. So moving away from my family was a huge compulsion I can see now, but at the time it felt like the right thing to do. And I lived on my own with a roommate, but we had kind of like a duplex situation for 3 years. And over those 3 years, I just saw my life kind of get flushed down the toilet. I dropped work and school and friends and dating. And I went from somebody who was extremely outgoing, social, and had a good time to somebody that was a shell of his former self. And day after day, I was spending 15, 16 hours of physical and mental compulsions and just saw my whole world disappear until I was just isolated and almost, it was just me and the disorder living together. And as you know, with your clients, when that happens, it's a dangerous combination of no outside like passions and values and just focusing all on the disorder. And it got to a point where I hit rock bottom. And for me, the real change around, unfortunately, was a suicide attempt. I mean, that was the only way that I felt I could get out of this mental trap in my head. I was really confused what was going on. I almost thought I had either like brain damage or an intellectual disability. And I felt defunct and like default and didn't really have any answers. And so that suicide attempt was like the lowest point in my life. And in retrospect, because my roommate at the time was able to come home and get me medical care, and obviously I survived, it was horrible and it was good because it was what got my family involved and got me on the path to get treatment and allowed me to become the advocate and the person I am today. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, sort of my experience with the disorder, but it spanned from when I was a small young child into my 20s until I finally got treatment in my early 20s.
Right. And then it's such a powerful story. From there, what were those first stages like of moving into recovery?
So I had a complete different idea of what recovery was going to look like. If I'm being honest, that was something that my therapist and I never spoke about. And so I had this fantasy in my head. I thought it was going to be rainbows and unicorns and amazing. And I was going to get done with treatment and everything in my life was going to come back and I was going to be the happiest person. And it was quite the opposite. It was a great last session with my therapist. And I felt like I had the tools to prepare for anything that OCD threw at me. But instead, something else happened. I finished and now I looked at my daily schedule and I had nothing. I had no passions, hobbies, friends, dating. Obviously with social media, I was looking at former friends from high school who I hadn't spoken to at that point for years, and they were dating and traveling the world. Some of them got married young and had kids. An ex of mine was working for the White House, and here I was, having spent my last 14 months in treatment, and I was living with my family, and had nothing. And I just fell into a deep depression. I got extremely angry, at my faith, at the world, at the universe, at my circumstances. And I just fell into like a depression, but an angry depression. And I also felt such a sense of loss. I felt cheated, and I felt like I lost so many important experiences in my life that everybody else my age got that I didn't.
Mm. Tell us more about the anger, because that's something I hear and see in my clients so much, of just being so angry at what the disorder has taken from them. What was that like for you?
I wish I would have handled it better. I think I needed something or someone to be angry at. So I started lashing out to obviously the only people I had in my life. I mean, I was angry at my mom for not catching it sooner. And my mom worked, she's not a nurse or anything. She's a dietitian, but she worked in the hospitals. And I was angry that she didn't recognize it. And how could she not figure it out? And I was angry that my family didn't do more. And I didn't come from like wealth or money. And so treatment, we couldn't afford certain treatments. So I had to do once a week. And I was angry at how long treatment took. And then I was angry at God. I was angry at the universe. And I wanted to push everybody away. I was so angry at everyone around me because I needed someone or something tangible to be angry at. And I was angry at all the experiences. I didn't get to go off to college and live in the dorms. I don't know if I would have really joined a frat. That's not really my thing. But just like knowing I didn't get to make the choice to say, no, I don't want to hang out with a bunch of frat boys, just not being able to make that choice. And I didn't date, and I didn't have those like relationships. And I was just angry, and I didn't really have an understanding or an explanation. And because OCD still at the time, I mean, even still today, but at the time wasn't something discussed, I felt like if I had gone through cancer, I had a community. I could go to a support group and go to different activities. My youngest nephew has autism, and there's so much resources and community and love and support. Instead, I just felt like I was chewed up, spit out, a bomb went off, and now it's sort of like I was thrown to the wolves and pick it up. I was angry at family because family now had this expectation that I should be working and friends and dating, and it wasn't coming quick enough. And I spent a lot of nights just laying in bed, just asking why, and just being angry and mad at the loss, and focusing more on what I didn't have instead of what I did.
Right. And what was the shift for you? I mean, that's an incredible shift you had to have made. How did you make a move out of anger? Because it's an important process and emotion to have, but it sounds like it was so big. How did you get in through that?
Yeah, my experience with anger lasted about 2 years. Luckily, in those 2 years, I still started to get my life back. I started to go back to work and school and make friends, but I was a very angry person. And I felt like I was putting on a mask and just going through the motions and still very angry. And I'm lucky. I didn't have a lot of family support. I had my mom and she's younger than me, but a sister close in my age. And they were super supportive. And they actually sat me down one day and they're like, we need to talk. They're like, you're always angry and you're always mad, and we get it. Like, none of us are going to discount your emotions and your feelings, but this has been 2 years that you have still allowed yourself to be absolutely angry, and it's a choice now. And one of the conversations we had is I didn't get that choice to have my life being consumed by the disorder. That was never a willing choice. The disorder hit since I was a little kid, but it was my choice to not do anything about my anger. And it was my choice to kind of like live in that space of anger. And my mom and my sister just really were authentic and opened up and said, you need to kind of soul search. Like, is this who you want to become? Do you want to continue to be angry and mad and continue to have more and more years taken from the disorder? Or do you finally want to be in the driver's seat and put that behind you and shift how your life looks? And I'll be honest, I remember leaving that conversation angry and feeling attacked. And then I had to sit there and really sleep on it and realize, like, here's two of the most important people in my life just saying, hey, Chris, like, you're better than this. And I remember just kind of having that, like, I remember driving down to the beach and just kind of sitting on a quiet area and just kind of laying there and thinking, like, they're right. I have allowed my anger to consume me for so long. And even though it's an emotion that's important to have, I think sometimes there's a time when the emotion has now played its part, and now we can decide to move from that emotion. And I remember saying, hey, like, it's time. What matters to you? What values do you have? One of the things that was super shift for me is I remember having a conversation with someone who actually a friend of mine, but they had addiction issues, not OCD. And we're kind of talking. And he said something. He's like, you know what? The nice thing about going to therapy is so often we take our cars in for tune-ups and we take them in when they need a shift, but we don't ever do that for ourselves. And we just kind of go on a negative trajectory. And that really spoke to me. And I said, you know what? I had been going down this shift for so long, and I had friends who didn't have OCD and didn't have the negative experiences I had, and they just kept going along with maladaptive behaviors. Maybe they're in a relationship that's not healthy or a job they don't like. And I almost looked at being sick as an opportunity to kind of pause and tune in and say, hey, I've almost been given this incredible gift at my age to stop and say, what matters to me? What values do I want to start achieving? What things do I want to bring back in my life that are positive? And that was kind of the start of this looking at it as an exciting journey to be able to rebuild the life the way that I want it, now that I had been living a way that OCD had dictated for so long.
Right. It's incredible. That is such a powerful experience that you had. It could have gone so much different.
Yeah, it could have. I mean, I could have continued to be angry. And I noticed that my life it was better than when I was sick, but it wasn't who I really was. I mean, I was hanging out with people that weren't the best. I was working a job that wasn't my passion. And so when I really started to shift and think of this as this amazing gift, this amazing opportunity to really sort of like, I got a clean slate at my age now, I was in my early 20s, like, who do I want to become? And I started pulling out things. And one of the things that I pulled out is I said, I need to share my story, not because I thought my story was incredible or anything, but because there wasn't a lot of people that I could look up to and kind of see their journey. And so I was fortunate enough to, at the time that the International OCD Foundation was looking for speakers, and I had done some speaking on national television and in newspapers and locally, and they decided to bring me on to their speakers bureau. And it gave me a chance both through media as well as at hospitals and conventions to start going and talking about my journey. And I felt like this renewed sense of purpose, one that maybe wasn't even there before I got really, really sick. I mean, obviously, I don't have any clue what my life would have looked like if OCD didn't hit it, but I got this amazing opportunity to kind of decide like, hey, I want to start giving back, and I want to be a part of a group of advocates that are speaking and putting ourselves out there. And so I no longer looked at it as a loss. I looked at it as a shift. Okay, that's how my life was for some time. I couldn't control it. But now that I'm back in control, what kind of life do I want to live? And that gift allowed me to almost like rebuild what my life looked like to something that I actually am proud of.
And rightfully so. I think you did what most teenagers and young adults don't have to think to do, right? Like, I think it's brilliant that you're really looking at it as an opportunity, because most kids don't have to look at that stuff. They can just float on. I'm curious, what was it like? Do you feel like you had grieved the losses, or are you still grieving the losses that OCD took from you?
Before advocacy, I felt like I was still grieving. Like I said, I think it was okay to feel the anger for those 2 years. I just don't think I was handling the anger correctly. I was allowing myself to really just sit in that, and it brought out ugly sides of me. I was mad all the time and angry. So that I wasn't proud of how I was coping with the anger. I think I definitely had grieved long enough. And what has really helped me is anytime I kind of go back in time and say, well, what if this, what if that? I just think of the movement of advocates like yourself and other people that I've become close with. That would never have been in my life. I mean, if I'm being honest, I don't think I would have ever jumped into a life of like service or advocacy. I was working in the entertainment field and was doing a lot of things that were kind of like for me. So I think taking a purpose of what I had gone through, which for me was like advocacy and really supporting others, that not only helped me really grieve, but it also helped make a purpose of what I had gone through. Mm-hmm. So that was really the shift from going from grieving to actually feeling empowered. Right. I would say to anybody that has gone through it, don't grief police yourself. Don't tell yourself you only have 4 days to grieve and then you have to just be over it. Like, give yourself that opportunity. And when you feel like you've done enough, even if it's not as an advocate, decide how you want to live your life. What is important for you, and recognize that those trials and tribulations had built a stronger self. I feel like I can handle anything now. Things that have come up in my life that have been difficult, I always remind myself of the battle and journey I went through, and it allows me to never feel overwhelmed or consumed or defeated. So just making purpose of the difficulty I went through really helped me grieve and become stronger.
Right. So powerful. Okay, so let's go back a little bit. So
Of
you
course.
had to sleep on it, and then you were like, all right, they're not wrong,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Right. So you slept on it, they're not wrong. What did you do that day?
You know what? Honestly, I love kind of sometimes looking at things objectively. So I kind of looked at my own life objectively. And what it really helped me is I sort of broke my life down into different segments. So I had family, friends, dating, health, pets, career, education. Like I broke it down and I said, am I proud of myself in any of the realms? And the answer was no. I mean, if I'm being honest, like I wasn't really living the life that I wanted to. And so for me, I wasn't spending really meaningful time with my family members. I wasn't having people of quality in my life. And so that's kind of after I really accepted what my mom and my sister had presented to me, I recognized the next step was starting to build my life. So at the time, I was a bartender for like a catering company, and that is not a bad job at all. I think any job is amazing. It just wasn't for me at the time, but I was doing it because I was just going through the motions. And so that's when I really decided, okay, like with my time, I want to spend a lot more of that time doing advocacy work and actually going back and getting an education to potentially one day treat OCD or at least do something in the mental health field. So for instance, that was a shift, like going back to school and doing advocacy work and starting to recognize like I wanted to make friends of substance and I wanted to spend my time doing things that mattered. And I started doing, volunteer work at an animal shelter and stuff. So it was just really kind of looking at my life and recognizing that I was just floating and kind of going through the motions. That's one thing that my mom said to me and my sister. They were like, you are so talented, Chris. Like you are so much, and whatever you're going to do, you're going to be great at it, and you're selling yourself short. You're living a life that isn't your life. And so kind of getting my hands dirty and getting into the technical work, I loved mindfulness and meditation. And one thing that I had done when I was younger was martial arts. And I found a martial arts studio that was really big on mindfulness and reflection and presence. And so they taught me mindfulness and meditation and proper breathing and being and connecting with nature. And that shifted some of my life. So just really looking at those different realms of my life and asking myself, like, am I living up to someone I'm proud of? And if not, what can I do to change that?
Right. Now, often people get stuck in that because from my experience, they're coming out or they're in the middle of going through a really difficult time and the life they want seems so far away.
Yeah.
Did you break it down into small pieces? Like, how did you break through that sort of massive hurdle?
Yeah. So my mom was a big part of my recovery. We were fortunate enough to do the keynote in 2012, I think, at the San Diego conference because of just recognizing how important she was to my story. And I was lucky. I didn't have a lot of support, but I had her. And my mom is good at stuff like that. And that was a big struggle for me too, is I felt like I was here. My life was over here. And that was going to take, in my head, decades to get there. And I was going to be 50-year-old, finally living the life I wanted. And it was almost easier to sleep and just avoid. And so my mom sat me down and she's like, you got to crawl, you got to walk, you got to run, and you got to sprint. And we got to start with the crawling. What really helped me is stop caring what society said and family members said, because a lot of people would ask my mom, what is your son doing? Why is he still living at home? Why isn't he working? They didn't get it. So when I kind of started tuning out what I thought society expected me to do, I just met myself where I was at. I gave myself self-compassion and said, look, maybe technically I'm not where most peers my age are, but that's like looking at somebody that got hit by a car and had to go through rehab just to be able to walk again. I wouldn't go up to them and say, how come you're not doing this? So let me meet myself where I'm at. And it was breaking it down. So I remember I wanted to do some kind of service. And so my mom said, I just want you to think about what kind of population would you want to help? And I just remember brainstorming and I was like, animals. So my first step is I looked at, animal shelters in the area, and I found one that said, hey, we have a training this Saturday and you can start. And I was like, okay. So just breaking it down to baby steps, I would say almost like 3 weeks from now versus like 3 months or 3 years or 3 decades. And, sometimes on my list, it was literally like make a phone call, send an email, and that felt doable. Whereas, travel the country and speak about OCD and, graduate and help treat with OCD or, date, like those things were just way too big. So you've got to break it down small and meet yourself where you're at. And sometimes one time my sister said, she's like, you got to be your own, like, president of your own fan club at this time, like just like cheering yourself on. And so I used to ask myself, I'm like, if I was the president of my fan club, would I be proud of what I did today to move forward? And did I do it in a way with self-compassion? And if the answer was yes, I felt good. And I'm not going to lie, there was days where I would beat myself up and say, wow, you walked dogs today, like big whoop. But then I had to remind myself, like, hey, like this is getting me to something bigger. So.
Right. You're incredible.
No, you're incredible. I think, I'll say this about the OCD community, like the people I meet in the OCD community, both treatment providers and people with it. I think one of my passions became working with young adults. I approached the IOCDF about starting the young adult track because I knew my story wasn't alone. And what you're asking, I'm sure in your own practice, you recognize that so many young adults and teens and in that transition period, my story is not unique. They're in the same place where they kind of have fallen off sort of like society's path for them, like high school and then college and then internship and they feel lost. And so not only do we have to deal with the aftermath of going through OCD and then the treatment and kind of living this new lifestyle, we have to create our own path. And that's hard. And so I found a way that works for me. And it may not be exactly the same way that everybody else does it. But I think if people can just find, I love how much you talk about ACT and I love how much you talk about values and stuff, because I was doing that without knowing what it was called. And that kind of led me to how to keep moving forward is what are my goals? What are the things that matter? And, people make vision boards or people write things down. And to me, it was just thinking of what goals do I want to go to and what small steps can I take day by day to get there?
Right. You touched on something that I think is so important when we talk about values, which is really setting aside and being able to observe how society tells us what to value.
Yeah.
Like, you should want to finish school and you should want to do these A, Bs, and Cs. And I think people really struggle with that, in what should I want kind of thing.
Yeah.
So did you have an internal knowing of what values you had, or did you have to work through that? Was that something that was quick, or you had to take a lot of time to get to a place where you knew what your values were?
Good question. They weren't innate at that point because my lifestyle had been so about survival that I didn't give myself a chance to think of these bigger values. For me, everybody kind of has sort of like a place that they do their thinking. And for me, it's the beach. I surfed since I was a kid. I just love the ocean. I love the beach. And I did spend a lot of time just driving my car to kind of like quiet places at the beach and just really sitting there and brainstorming, and not in an obsessive, obsession way. I was fortunate that OCD didn't ever kind of try to put its ugly head into that part of my recovery. It was stepping back. The lucky thing, and I'm going to call them out because I've said it to them on purpose. My two aunts, who I love dearly now, and they totally get it. At the time, they were like the faces of society because they were really the ones at family events saying, why, getting emotional, it was hard. It was hurtful at times where it was, why aren't you this and why aren't you that? And like I said, I mean, it's a happy ending. They've apologized and they understand OCD more now, but they were almost the faces of society telling me you should do this and you should do that. And I loved them dearly. And I also recognized that my life and my path wasn't the same as theirs. And every time I would try to fit myself into sort of what society expected, I found myself miserable, absolutely miserable. And so I sat down and really tapped into what people used to tell us when we were kids, like you can dream and be anything you are. And like I said, because I had shifted into this place where it was now my chance to really kind of wipe the slate clean and decide who and what I want to be, I came from it from just what will make me happy? What, when my head hits the pillow at night, will I be happy doing? If I was older in life, looking back and reflecting on my life, like what would really, really matter? And that really helped direct me to that. And it was a lot of soul searching. I'd worked in the entertainment industry in media for a long time before I got sick, and I was, started getting back into that. And I remember thinking, at 65, is that going to matter? Is it going to matter to me that I interviewed this person or we covered this event? And I said, no, it'd be fun, but it's not really impactful. And my sister was a teacher, or was going to school for a teacher at the time, and I envied that. I'm like, she's going to, child after child she works with, she's going to have an impact. And I remember thinking, well, I can have an impact too. It's just going to be a different population. So these conversations was this balance between pushing out kind of like society's messaging and really sort of soul searching. A lot of it was trial and error. I would think I would love something and I would try it, and it was not my thing. I remember I had a friend who was traveling and doing a lot of photography, and I was like, oh, that'd be awesome to travel and do photography. And she needed an assistant. And so I did that for a little bit, and I didn't like it. I mean, it was a lot of setting the shot up, hours, take a quick picture, tear down, and it just wasn't fun. So I think being open and just trying different things. And if it ends up not being something you like, it doesn't mean that that was a waste of energy or a loss. You pull from it what things you liked and didn't, and then you search for things that kind of have those things in it that are positive. So it was a work through. It took some time, but I made sure to not only think, I also acted so that there was something going on at the time, and I was able to keep forward momentum.
Right, right. So the last chapter that you talked about at OCD Game Changers was hope.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that chapter?
Yeah. I was super lucky, and it was the quickest little interaction. But one day when I was in the waiting room for therapy, so there was no support group really in my area where I lived. I lived 2 hours from where I was getting treatment, and the support group at the treatment center I was at, unfortunately, was full. And so I still at that time had never met somebody with OCD. And one day I got there early and was sitting in the waiting room, and there was actually a girl whose last session was that day. And we were just kind of talking back and forth, and and I was early on in my treatment. And she was like, I know this doesn't even make sense to where you're at right now, but there's going to be a day that you have your last, you have your last appointment, and you're going to be leaving here one day. And I remember that gave me so much hope. I just knew that, here this girl is, and it doesn't seem like she had some magic pill that I didn't have, and she was severe like I was. And here she is having her last session. And so I remember in my last session, sitting in that waiting room, waiting for the appointment, thinking oh my goodness, that girl was right. And so for me, going to that event in Denver, the OCD Game Changers, and I was really deciding what I wanted to call my last chapter. And I just thought everybody that came out that day, not only obviously the advocates and the speakers, but everybody that made that trek through that horrible snow, because you and I are from California, we don't know about that snow, but these people got in these cars in crazy snow to be at this just awesome event and to build this community. And I thought of it, I'm like, you know what? This is exactly what happened to me in the waiting room. These people are going to hear something today that gives them hope. And so you doing this podcast, you doing all the things that you're doing with the online treatment providing for people that can't reach it, with, Chris Bear is doing an online conference. I mean, all the times that we put out OCD Southern California doing the events, every time somebody shows up and hears a success story, or even not even a success story, but a success moment, that person is going to leave there better off than when they came. They're going to leave with that smidgen of hope. And the more little hope that they get put inside them, the stronger that they're going to continue to fight on those hard days. And that quick conversation in that waiting room was enough to get me to propel through treatment. And I just knew that at that time and at that event, everybody in that room was writing a new chapter of hope for everybody that was involved and everybody that's going to watch this stuff afterwards. And so doing things like this and speaking to others just gives people hope. And it's just going to have more and more people go through treatment, get better, and then turn back around and hopefully help as well and instill hope in others.
Tears. Oh my gosh, you're so wonderful. Okay. Is there anything that you feel you want to add that maybe I haven't asked?
Well, thank you so much, Kim. I just wanted to leave with one last message. I remember one time somebody came up to me after a talk and they said, you seem so happy. After going through everything that you went through, you seem so happy. How are you happy? And I remember telling them, I am not, my pay grade isn't high enough to know why we're on this planet and what we're doing here. But one thing that I have discovered for me, and this is only for me, is what happiness is really about is to be able to identify, like, why do I think I was put here? What do I think my purpose is? And why do I think I've gone through all the trials and tribulations I have? And for me, it was to give back, and it was to be an advocate and to speak. So if there's one takeaway that I hope all of your listeners and viewers take, is there's something about everybody watching this and listening to this right now that makes them unique and special and is why they're here. And it doesn't have to be in the realm of advocacy and OCD, but it's really deciding, like, I'm going to go after that. And OCD is going to try to attack it. It always attacks the things that we care about the most, but it's really deciding that that thing you're going for is more important than anything OCD can throw at you. I always am going to have a soft heart for teens and young adults just because that's when my journey has gone through, and that's been such a passion of mine. But even for everybody out there that is part of this podcast right now, it's really tapping into yourself and doing that soul searching and deciding what really matters to you and what life are you proud of, and what is that one major thing you've been put on here on the earth to do and would make you feel fulfilled. And when I see people step out of treatment and go into the world after that feels so lonely and cold, when they start to gravitate towards that thing for them, some people it's things, but for a lot of people it's that one thing, whether it's being a mother and having kids, or whether it's somebody that really wants to change the way that, certain legislation around mental health, whatever that may be. When I see people tap into that, they just become themselves. They get their life back, and suddenly OCD no longer has any power. So it's kind of the message I wanted to leave with. A place that everybody can find me. So I am really involved in OCD Southern California. It's an official affiliate of the International OCD Foundation. So I've been lucky to be the vice president and board member. So our website is just simply ocdsocal.org. And you can go on there and you could message us, and we have events going on throughout Southern California. I'm also earning my hours towards licensure, and I'm so excited to be able to assist in the treatment of OCD and give back and kind of go full circle. So I work at the Gateway Institute. That's in Costa Mesa, California. We're right near South Coast Plaza. So it's just been exciting to be able to now be sort of on the other side of the couch and treating and help others. And then besides that, the best way to get a hold of me is I have social media. It's just my name. So whether it's Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, it's just at Chris Tronsden. And for a lot of people, will just kind of reach out to me and just ask me about my journey or just want to talk. And I always answer messages. And then lastly, my email is my name. So Chris Tronsden, and then it's at gatewayocd.com. And all the time, I'm happy to answer emails. Or if you email OCD Southern California, that's info@ocdsocal.org. And people can just put my name in the title. And I love kind of answering any questions and anything like that. So I just like to be of service any way that I can give back and stuff like that. But I just want to end by thanking you. I mean, Kim, I've gotten to know you so much over a span of time, but I think what you've been doing with CBT School and with the podcast has been incredible, and the services that you've given back. So when you reached out for me to be on here, I was elated, I was excited, I was just so happy, and I feel so honored. And thank you for everything that you're doing. And, I've seen you be more open about your own, kind of personal stuff, and all the stuff that you're doing is just touches my heart. So thank you. This has been amazing. And to everybody listening, there's hope. We're writing that chapter together. There will be one day where everybody's getting treatment right when they first start to see symptoms, and we will have a supportive, loving, worldwide community. And I'm excited to be part of that.
Thank you.
Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.